You're listening to Press This, a podcast that drives into the heart of WordPress and the community. I'm your host, Brian Gardner, WordPress advocate at WP Engine. Each week, I'll explore various topics, providing valuable insights and actionable tips for navigating the ever-evolving world of WordPress. You can subscribe to Press This on Red Circle, iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcasting app. You can also download the episodes directly from WMR.fm. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Press This podcast. We have a great show today talking about the power of community. But before we get started, I actually need to introduce myself. My name is Brian Gardner, and I am the new host of Press This podcast. I have been building with WordPress since 2006. Obviously, no stranger to WordPress in the community. I was the founder of StudioPress, the co-creator of the Genesis framework. And in the fall of 2021, I actually officially joined WP Engine, and I'm currently on the marketing team as a WordPress advocate. My position is a great fit as it allows me to do things I love: design, WordPress, and community, which brings us back to today's show. The topic we are going to cover is the power of community, specifically the WordPress community. And I am joined by my colleague, Sam Brockway, who is now a lifecycle marketing manager. We'll give her a minute to talk about that. But for 2 years previously, she was the community manager for us on our developer relations team. Sam, welcome to the show.
Hello, I'm so excited to be here, and I have to give a caveat right off the bat, or just a disclaimer really. And that is, you might hear chickens in the background, and you might hear a little baby making noise because I'm over here hanging out, recording this podcast, working, and enjoying my homesteading life with all my children around. So just an FYI, I'm keeping it real over here. And I feel like that's the energy I've always come to work with, especially as a community manager and now in my new role, just bringing the human side to the WordPress space.
I love it. I am a huge fan of authenticity, and I love what Ruthie Lindsay says, Nashville-based designer. She says, all of us are looking for authenticity, and the things we think will repel people usually do the opposite. And so I live by that. I love that. I use that quote as often as I can. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to be authentic, especially in light of community. We talk about code. It's a little bit easier to kind of not be authentic, but community and people is where it's at. What we're going to do is we're going to just get into the story of Sam a little bit just to understand her background with community. So let's start there. I remember 3 years ago, 2.5, 3 years ago, I was doing outreach on behalf of WP Engine to the community. I think I did a Twitter thing saying, hey, does anybody want to do a one-on-one and talk about WordPress or whatever, of which I believe you sort of signed up. And so we had a one-on-one call, and through our conversation, I realized it was great to talk to you as a member of the WordPress community, but I also knew in the back of my mind that we were looking to build our team, and we were looking specifically for a community manager. And in our interaction, and I think maybe one more after that, I was like, I think Sam's really going to be perfect for this role. The question is she interested? I want to know from your perspective, what was it about our conversation and the potential job position here at WP Engine that piqued your interest?
Yeah, so just even a little bit more context, I was running my own WordPress freelancing business. I had one employee. I had a mentorship, mentoring other people to build their own web design and development freelancing businesses. And so I had been doing that for almost 5 years. I found great success in it, and I was fully embodying the business owner and freelancer mindset when we met, Brian, on Twitter, which is so funny because I had a Twitter account for years and never used it. And then I randomly was like, maybe I should start, exploring this platform a little bit. And then you and I quickly met. So it was just, it all happened so fast for a platform that I was not really familiar with. When we had our initial conversations and we were talking about things, and you mentioned, the community manager position and just everything that WP Engine was doing with developer relations, I was in a place in my personal life and in the business where it was actually a really hard time and decision, because I was like I said, I was experiencing success with the business, but I was a little bit burnt out, to be honest, with the client work and with the sometimes like the lack of boundaries or just that feeling of like I have to always be on and always available. And at the time, I was a single mom with a daughter, and now I've got a husband and family and everything, which we can get into at another point. But at that time, it was the idea of kind of going back into corporate, quote unquote, was scary, but it was also like this could be some stability and some opportunity that is right in line with work that I've already been doing, which was again that community stuff with the mentorship and with I had this group called Tech with Intention for a long time, which was for people who were building with WordPress and just like needed tech help. So it felt very kismet and perfectly timed, and it truly was. Closing down the business was actually a huge relief, but also a big like identity shift because for so many years I had thought of myself as like a business owner and a freelancer and I can make my own schedule and just like all of those perks of running your own business, which I still totally believe in. That's the community that I serve. Those are the customers that I speak to, the people that I work for essentially. But it was right and it was nice for me personally to move into something different that was not freelancing. So that was where that whole conversation went. And like I said, it perfectly timed. You just suddenly appeared in this platform I never used, and the conversation was natural, and everything followed from there. It's 2022 was the time when my life came together, to be honest with you. So that was really awesome.
I'm glad to have played a role in that story and continue to play a role because we're still colleagues here, and I hope we are for many years. I am a huge fan of the movie Hope Floats, and there's a quote in there. I can't remember who actually said it back in the day, but life is what happens when you're busy making other plans, right? And so the same thing happened to me, a little bit different. I was sort of coming out of the sale of Studio Press and kind of wandering the proverbial wilderness and wanting to build products. And I reached out to Heather Brunner, our CEO, and just kind of asked about, hey, some things. And so she then approached me similarly, like unexpectedly. It was not in my plan to work for another company again because it had been like 15 years since I had an employer. And so I was also at the right place, I guess, serendipitously, where I was like, I just need a season of getting paid to do work. And it was really, again, like I said at the beginning of the show, work I love, WordPress design and community. I love people. And I know you love people, so we share that, which is why I think we work so well together, and why we're talking about community here. So one thing that I didn't intend on talking about this, but I want to bring it up. You had mentioned a phrase, the community you serve, and I want to dig into that a little bit more because that's actually one of the endearing things about you is that you look at your role with community in a servant way. And I guess it's easy though when you don't have to build your business, right? We get paid to do this now. I have to acknowledge that. But talk to me a little more about, I don't know if you meant that or if that just innately came out, but just the whole idea of serving people in a community. I mean, it goes back to, religious things and the Bible and stuff like that. But serving people is just it's a mindset of, low expectations and so on. And so talk to me a little bit more about your experience with the community of people you served maybe ahead of coming on here, and then we can dive into the community we currently serve.
Yeah, it's interesting that you called that out. My husband actually often says that service to others is like one of the most valuable, enriching parts of life. And even when I ran my own business and I was more connected to like the final revenue and all of that, having a community and serving my clients and serving the community and just being there to guide and give back and be generous has always been something that I've valued. And even in my personal life, I teach my kids, about generosity and giving to others, and just that idea that like giving to somebody is so much more valuable and life-giving than taking. So I think that I've always brought that same energy into whatever community it is that I'm working with. And in this case, for the WordPress community, I feel like let's see, I think I built my first WordPress blog in 2014. So over the last 11 years of building things with WordPress, I've amassed so much knowledge that giving that information back to other people, sharing information, curating it for them based on what they need in their experiences has always been something that I've enjoyed doing. And so doing it inside of that role as a community manager was incredibly life-giving, to be honest. And I think that doesn't really matter what you're doing in your role, like if you whatever your career is, right? Or if you are a business owner, if you think of your work as service, it's going to feel purposeful and meaningful. And that's just the way that I live my life, I guess.
Yeah, I love the idea of sort of and this is where we could probably unpack quite some time, just talking about how the WordPress community, when we say give back, we're not even necessarily talking about giving back to WordPress, the actual project and committing code and kind of all of that stuff. But it makes me think back to my early days when I started Studio Press and selling themes. And some of my best friends back then, and the people who I would consider confidants, were actually competitors of mine because they also were running theme shops back in the day. Corey Miller is a great example. He started iThemes, and we would talk daily, like on Gmail chat, about what was working and what wasn't working. And so I learned early on sort of the power of, I think we called it co-opetition back in the day,
Mhm.
which is where you're like working alongside your competition. Things are a little different nowadays in WordPress than they were 15 years ago, but the whole rising tide lifts all boats. I still believe in that, and I think even on our build mode call on Friday, Chris Huffnagel made a comment about like, hey, I want you to succeed, and I want your product to help me build my product, and I want people to buy both products because what we're trying to do is get adoption to the Black editor and so on. And so the mindset in the WordPress community of that, working alongside one another, it's kind of mind blowing because in most cases it's, sort of Lord of the Flies. And so talk to me about that, even just, with what you're seeing now or what you saw back then, the idea of working alongside folks and, serving alongside folks.
Yeah, that's great. I feel like I remember hearing this phrase a lot, using this phrase a lot, and like back when before I even became the community manager at WP Engine, community over competition. There is plenty. I remember telling this to my mentees, the women that I was working with who were starting their own web design businesses. Technically, they were my competitors, right? If I really wanted to think about that. But
Mhm.
I just always said, there are so many people out there that need a website. Me, like hoarding is not going to mean that I get every website project that ever comes about, right? So like there's only value in sharing the knowledge, sharing referral opportunities. I think like building out that network. I actually to add some more background here, I was not a big part of the quote unquote WordPress community before I started at WP Engine. I think a little bit before when I joined Twitter and I was like, oh, there's like all these people talking about WordPress specifically on Twitter. That's when I kind of like got my feet wet in the community and I met some people like Adam Warner was another person that comes to mind from GoDaddy, who was someone that I reached out to and started talking with kind of early on when I started into like the WordPress Twitter space. But before that, I was more so in like the business owner. The biggest group I was a part of was called like Boss Mom, which was just like moms running businesses online. And there was that feeling of like community over competition. There's always room for everyone. And so when moving into being the community manager and just being more active in the WordPress community, it was all about giving and sharing information. Like you said, it wasn't necessarily like, let's commit code and like give back in that way, but giving back to others and making sure that everybody knows how to do the things that they want to do so we can all be successful because there's room for absolutely everyone to have whatever level of success they're looking for in the WordPress web development space. There's never going to be a shortage of people that need the work that we're doing. And that's just how I personally feel about it. I see it very much from an abundance mindset where there is so much opportunity. There's almost too much opportunity sometimes.
Well, when the platform powers 50% of the internet, I mean, there's definitely going to be all facets of types of websites to be built. I remember back in the days of Genesis, I mean, that was the first tech community that I was ever really a part of and built. One of the things I think I loved most watching that develop was the fact that so many of the developers and the designers and the people who built websites on Genesis, they were so friendly with one another. They were so willing to help out other people in forums back in the day. Now we have Facebook groups, but somebody would go in and there's always someone who is better at you than what you do, and there's always somebody who you're better than. And so there's always the give it back and the pay it forward sort of mentality where I would just watch and just sit there and watch so and so teach so and so how to do a thing to help them get their client, and then with no expectation in return. And then you hear like the larger stories where you're talking to somebody at a WordCamp and they're like, man, I really this person, Bill Erickson, comes to mind as a person who's just wicked smart and really a good guy, but he was always willing to help other people out, even if it meant, hey, take this client because I don't have time for it. And so I think when people kind of experience that sort of mentality, I mean, the Genesis community was in its day, it was so flourishing and it was so healthy and it was just so fun to watch and be a part of. Yeah, thanks for the the walk down memory lane.
I also feel like there is maybe something inherent about WordPress being open source and things like that that makes it feel more collaborative by nature, because I know that there's like not every tech community is like this. There's something special about WordPress. I mean, when I was making my first blog in 2014, I watched I watched a video or read a blog post from someone called like Just a Girl in Her Blog,
Hmm.
and she built her site with Genesis, I think, and that was
Yep.
like the first one that I created some theme. But it's just, there was just like a giving back of knowledge, and that was palpable versus, I don't know, I just maybe some other communities are like that as well, maybe not, but there is something special about WordPress for sure.
Yeah, I think you're talking about Abby.
Yeah, Abby.
I remember her from back in the day. You mentioned Abby. I just mentioned Bill Erickson. You had talked about Adam Warner, and I had mentioned Corey Miller before that. So let's talk about some of the members in the WordPress community. At first, when I was like writing the question, I'm like, well, you don't say you like them most, or like who do you like the best? Who are your favorite members? That's not really the way in which I ever want to think about something like this. Let's talk about the people who inspire you, whether it's directly or indirectly, whether it's you witness their actions from afar. Who are the people in the community that you see are just good, wholesome, legitimately there for the right reasons and just doing nothing but just good work?
Man, that is a really big question because so many people come to mind. I think the people that I feel most inspired by, I'll say this more broadly and then I'll talk specific people. I feel inspired by those who are trying different things and just willing to share what they learn as they go, whether it's a fail or it is something that is successful and they want to, give you a full tutorial. Like there's just everybody in between, right? I feel like one thing that I started doing on Twitter myself was I was just like, I'm going to play with things in the block editor. And as I find out little tricks and tips, one of them is like the slash command. I was like, I'm just going to make a video and then just put it up there. And then if this is helpful to anybody, then they have it. Those are the people that I feel like I just value the most, is just like just generously sharing their knowledge as they go, because I don't know if you've already alluded to this or not, but like WordPress has changed dramatically since the beginning, and we're all in this like learning stage and just testing things and sharing knowledge. So some people that come to mind are Rich Tabor. I love following his stuff. He does really good breakdowns of like new releases and things to look for and different tricks and things that he's trying. Nick Diego is a former colleague at WP Engine. Now he works at Automatic, and I just feel like he is such a good, he's so good at teaching concepts. And so I like watching his developer hours at WordPress.org. Courtney Robertson from GoDaddy, just another great person to follow. And I feel like she's such a community player. Like she shares so many job opportunities. She shares so many things highlighting other people in the community. And of course, I believe she's like the lead on the training team, if I'm not mistaken. So she's obviously like just so willing to share information and knowledge about WordPress. And then the last person I'll say is Justin Tadlock. I just think he's a good person. We have our homesteading similarities. So I go to him for WordPress and how to do things with strawberries and blueberries and things. So he's another good one to follow along with.
Obviously, I respect all the people that you mentioned for all the same reasons and stuff like that. And, I try to find it's easy in tech or WordPress or on Twitter to sort of like hang in, like, we'll call it the cool kids crowd or whatever, where just interact with the people who everybody knows and stuff like that. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I catch myself doing that all the time. But I get inspired by, we have every Friday we've had this thing called Build Mode. It's a live interactive call where we talk candidly about WordPress with, business owners and product developers of WordPress. And there are some people in there who, I wouldn't say they're nameless because they obviously have names, but people who aren't as known, people who are actually doing the work and not talking about doing the work on the platforms in which we interact with them. And so there are some people inside of Build Mode that I'm like, man, these are some brilliant people who are just heads down, doing work with WordPress, giving back, stuff like that. One of my favorite people, I love her to death, is Carolina Niemark. She is, I believe, through Yoast, sponsored contributor. And I met her finally for the first time this past year at WordCamp in Maryland, and I got to give her a great big hug. And I'm like, this is what it's all about. These are the people in the community who aren't afraid to voice their opinion, do it very diplomatically and not in a way that sort of rubs people the wrong way, and probably are just underappreciated for their efforts. She runs a site called fullsiteediting.com. I talk about that as often as I can because it's probably outside of WordPress.org itself, the truth of source, and maybe even better than that at times. And she just has just another great big heart for being in the community and trying to make a difference and all of that. Amber Hines with her accessibility stuff. Like, I love the stuff that she does and how willing she is to help people, especially with accessibility. It's one of those things where it shouldn't be, but it is sort of the marginalized aspect of web development. And
Mhm.
so I think when she finds people with like a pulse who are actually interested in accessibility, she jumps at the opportunity to work alongside them and to help move that forward. So those are just a few people that I can think of off the top of my head that, I just, who inspire me, who do work really just without a whole lot of maybe expectation. You walked us back into one of the questions I had here, which was around the change of WordPress over the years. The early years, the first 10, 12, maybe 15 years, like WordPress was just WordPress and it was its own vibe at the time. And then this thing called Gutenberg happened, which maybe 6 years ago at this point.
Mhm.
Matt talked about that vision. Originally was the editor, then became the exploratory plugin. And so now we've got the block editor. And with that comes a ton of opinions. And within a community and platforms like Twitter/X for people to vocalize their opinions around these things, I think there's been, I wouldn't say a polarization, but it's almost like maybe for the first time ever, there was a reason for the WordPress community. People say divided, even though it's not that, but it feels like that at times. Talk to me about the current status of like the WordPress community in light of that.
Yeah, that is such an interesting and sticky call out.
Mm-hmm.
Word like you said, WordPress for so long was just WordPress. I feel like if you watched a video with someone walking through how to do something in WordPress, it really didn't matter what theme you were using, what plugin you were using. For the most part, you experienced the same thing when you were inside of WordPress in the dashboard. And with the dawn of the Gutenberg and even page builders and things like that, it has totally changed the experience of WordPress depending on how you have it configured. And so in so doing, I do think that it has created not a rift in the community, but just like more things to talk about almost, because it's like everybody has like a different curated experience of WordPress. And if you're brand new to WordPress, I think it even gets more confusing. And if you're brand new to the WordPress community, because you're like, well, you're saying I'm doing something with blocks, but like all I see are like these like meta box things and like ACF. What is that? So there's just like so much to talk about because there's so many, as I always say, so many different ways to WordPress, and everybody has an opinion, right? My personal opinion is that you should be able to build with WordPress however you want to. And there should be good resources for whatever configuration you have set up. If you want to do things with blocks, there should be good resources for you to do that. If you want to do things the classic way, there should be good resources for that. But I think that there are some more like vocal people in the community who are a little bit more like, my way is the right way. And I truly don't think that there is one good, perfect way to do things in WordPress. I think that's the power and the beauty of it, is that you can build however you want to, build whatever you want to, in whatever way you want to. And that as developers or builders, we kind of get to choose our flavor of WordPress based on the project or based on how we like to work. And I do think that there's been more negativity in the community because of those more dominant voices. But I think that if we can embrace that spirit of like many ways to WordPress and just like you do it the way that you want to do it, then we can actually just continue to learn and dive deeper with each other, right? We can say, okay, I like to do things with blocks. Let me learn everything I can from, these folks who are doing it this way. I want to use a page builder, or I want to use it the classic way with different fields and things like that. Let me learn from these particular people. So maybe it divides up the community a little bit more, but we still all have like the same love of WordPress. It's just that we have our different flavor that we prefer. What do you think, Brian? Do you feel like there's opportunity for the community to come together? Is there more division, but like, is that an okay thing? Like, what do you think about it all?
Well, I'm not going to try to justify that. I believe to some extent the WordPress community resembles hip hop back in the 90s, where there was East Coast and West Coast and yada, yada, yada. I grew up in the 90s. I speak about this because I lived in both places. I mean, the reality is we're all in the same gang, right? That was one of the songs that kind of tried to bring people back together. And even before that, back in the 80s, and Sam, this probably predates you, and I don't know if you've heard the original version of We Are the World, but that was a movement by musicians all across the country to help folks in Africa. And so I often go to YouTube and I watch the video and I watch all of the people who were in that video, from Kenny Loggins to Michael Jackson to Bruce Springsteen to Al Jarreau, like all of these people who did music their own way in different genres and whatever, but they came together. And so like these are the two things I think about when it comes to WordPress. Yes, WordPress, it is one community at the very top level. It's one piece of software. We're all using it. So therefore, at that highest level, we're all in the same community. I do agree that because of Gutenberg, that there's been sort of, again, we'll call it a divide, not really, but it presented an opportunity. Even ahead of that, the page builders actually started that divide ahead of Gutenberg. Gutenberg just became, we'll just say, WordPress's answer to the page builder. And so even before Gutenberg, sort of this, hey, here's a different way to do it. Obviously, smart, savvy people in the WordPress space found that opportunity, made lots of money because there was a need. And to some extent, and I'll try to say this diplomatically, I think a lot of the opinions that come from people, negative opinions or just sort of doubters or naysayers around Gutenberg, block editor, the future of WordPress, might come less about whether or not the block editor is actually there and can do the things, but more about, hey, my business is now at risk because of this. And I knew from the start that the page builders, I'm friends with Robbie at Beaver Builder. I mean, all of those, Elementor, Divi, like all of them, they knew once it became part of WordPress core that there was an existential threat to their business because WordPress itself was going to compete against them. That being said, I don't think there's one person who I feel is out of line collectively with the way they've handled all of this. Yes, and I'll call him out by name because around all of this is Kevin Geary. I mean, he's the first one that comes to mind. Carl Hancock's another guy who I love the fact that he's bold with his opinions, not afraid to voice them, will challenge the status quo often, but they both do it still with respect and in a way where I'm like, okay, like I get we totally fundamentally disagree around this stuff. Obviously opportunities to hear each other out, to understand, hey, you are actually right with what you're saying. I don't disagree with you. And I don't think you or I or anybody, at least from WP Engine side, ever said block editor is the right way to WordPress. It is the way we believe in. It is obviously the future of WordPress and has been for several years. And so I've always sort of operated from that perspective saying, hey, this is how it's going to be. I know it's not perfect. It's why I spend all day, all night inside of local and Gutenberg active and beta testing WordPress because I'm trying to make it better for everybody to benefit from. I wish it was a little further along. That might be the takeaway in all of this because I wish everybody could be a little more aligned with the future way of WordPressing, for lack of a better phrase. But I still feel like it's been relatively healthy. And there's more to say, obviously. We could probably spend all day talking about sort of all of this. But you did mention a little while ago talking about people who are newer to WordPress, right? Because WordPress has been around. We just celebrated the 20-something anniversary. And I've been around since 18 years. And so there's a lot of history around WordPress that people who are new to it have no idea. And, ignorance is bliss, right? Like for those people, it's like they're better off than we are because they never knew life before the block editor. So they're like, hey, this is great. This works. And I'm like, well, if you knew what it was 15 years ago, your perspective would change. What is your advice for people who are newer to the WordPress community? Less users, but more around people who are building and designing and developing and wanting to start little businesses. I wonder if you're going to say one thing I'm thinking, but I'll let you talk first before I throw my little thing in there, a little phrase I was just thinking of as I was talking about that. What's your advice for those people in identifying their niche in the community as a builder and kind of all of that?
Yeah, I would say the first thing is to find a community, right? So when we say the WordPress community, there's no like one place. There are tons. There's things on Discord and Twitter and Slack. There's the WordPress.org contributor community. So finding a space to interact with other people who are building with WordPress, again, for knowledge sharing, but also just for networking. I think that that's really powerful, especially when you're starting a business. Brian has mentioned this multiple times, which, I mean, you said this about build mode, which is the weekly call you host all about WordPress that we used to co-host. And now with my new role, I no longer co-host it, but I hope to be attending because this is such a powerhouse of people that use WordPress and are just builders and freelancers and agency developers. And they're out there doing the work with WordPress and they have so much wisdom to share, as well as great connections, right? I think that I mentioned this in the beginning. I wasn't in the WordPress community when I had my freelance business, but I was in all these other communities of people who were just looking for tech help and they needed WordPress build outs and all sorts of things. And it was just such a great way, being in like different Facebook groups and things like that was just such a great way to get to know other people and to just build relationships with them. I think business is relationships. That's how you run a successful business, is people buy from people. So getting out there, getting to know people, asking questions, not being afraid to say, hey, I don't really understand how to do this. Does anyone know how to do it? And you will be, especially in the WordPress space, you will be floored by how many responses you'll get. So I think getting out there, though, the beauty of the online space is that it is so easy to raise your hand and join a community. I'm an introvert, so like the idea of like walking through a door and going to like forget what they're called, but the small business things that towns host, it just was never for me. So having access to just everyone online was a much simpler ask for myself. And I think if anyone else relates to that, online communities are fantastic. All right, Brian, what were you going to say?
And I don't really mean this, though I kind of mostly do. I would tell them to stay off Twitter. I mean, and I say that sort of tongue
You
in
said
cheek.
stay off Twitter?
Stay off Twitter.
Oh my goodness.
And that's less about specifically Twitter and more about the idea of just not letting some of the louder people in the room affect the way in which they do their business.
That's fair.
That's really what I'm trying to say. And I joke by saying stay off Twitter, but because as we know, that's how you and I met. Like Twitter's and other social media platforms, LinkedIn or whatever, super helpful and great breeding ground for community building and so on. So I don't mean stay off social media. I do say and to be curious. Like I remember before I started working for WP Engine, I was working with Chris Hofnagel and Rafal and our friend Daryl in a little agency, and we had a little powwow where we got on and built each other up. And I remember Daryl said this, but I didn't really embrace it until he actually said it and called it out. We were talking about things we love about each other. It was really a good call. And he's like, Brian, the thing I love about you most is that you're curious. And at first I was like, what does that even mean? But then I was like, he's so right? Because I'm a creative. And when it comes to WordPress and testing and building I want to be on the front line. But in order to do that, you have to be curious. You have to say, how does this work? That's how I figured out, CSS and theme building back in 2006. It was the desire to want to learn. And the only way at that point was to Google it or to just start playing under the hood. And so my two pieces of advice to people who are new is stay off Twitter, but really to be curious and to stay curious and to not let the loud people in the room discourage you from the path towards that discovery. In that process, you find your way. And when you find your way, then you find your people. And I'm literally about to cry by saying that. That's really strange. I was not prepared for this. As you know, and I am across social media, I am a huge fan Walt Disney and Disney World and all of that. I'm going to use this quote. It's at the bottom of one of my theme demos. You can design and create and build the most wonderful place in the world, but it takes people to make the dream a reality. And I feel that's true. And people in the WordPress community can make fun of me for being all emotional and being too people-y or whatever, but I'm like, it's so true. And each and every one of us is here because of other people.
Yeah.
And that really is the power of community.
100%. That's to be honest, that was always my favorite thing about being a community manager, and even in my new role at WP Engine, like, people are the center of everything that I do. Like we talked about in the beginning, it's that service back. The human side of running a business, of building a website, like, it seems like, well, this is tech, like, this isn't supposed to be human, centered, but it is. At the end of the day, it is. The people that are building with WordPress are human beings with lives and people and families. And I know that I asked this question multiple times on Twitter, and I love asking it because I just love seeing the responses. It's like, what has WordPress opened up for you? Like, what has the fact that WordPress exists allowed you to do? And the responses always, like, just make my heart so happy. It's like, I get to stay home with my family. I get to live wherever I want to and travel and take my kids places. I get to go to my kids' field trips. Like, that's incredible, and that's the kind of stuff that it inspires me as far as WordPress. Like, I can be inspired all day by, like, nice designs and cool sliders and carousels, but it's the people that are the most inspiring and the things that they're doing with their lives because of WordPress.
Well, that is a great segue and a great ending to a conversation we're going to have very soon, and what will likely be the next episode here on the Press This podcast, which is your product, your service needs a community, right? Like, you're an advocate of that. And, you come from the world and land of freelancers and all of that. And it intersects with your love and passion for people and community. And so we're going to talk a little bit less about the WordPress community specifically, and more around the importance and power from a marketing perspective, from a trust building perspective, of building a community around your product or service, and how that can help make you a successful WordPress business owner. That being said, Sam, do you have any final words, sage advice, wisdom to people who are listening around community or WordPress? Anything you want to say there?
I'll just say, just reiterate, just get out there and meet people, try things, and as you learn, share. Don't be afraid to say, to share something that you think is simple and easy, because don't forget there are people out there that have no idea what WordPress is, how to use it, and they may stumble across something that you've, shared it as a response in a forum or in a Facebook group or on Slack, and be like, oh, this is the answer I needed. So go learn, share, absorb. Let's just keep making this knowledge house bigger and bigger across all of us.
On that note, we will see you all again on the next episode of Press This. As a reminder, Press This is a podcast that delivers valuable insights and actionable tips for navigating the ever-evolving world of WordPress. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.